Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Becky Scherr.
And I'm Michael Brodkorb.
This week we bring you yet another interview, but this one marks the first conversation with our new guest. We are pleased to be joined by State Senator Matt Klein. Senator Klein represents Senate District 53, which includes South and West St. Paul, Inver Grove Heights, and more. He is currently running for Congress in the 2nd Congressional District. With Senator Klein, we will break down a bit of the 2026 legislative session, which kicked off earlier this week. We will also get into what session looks like from his insider perspective and what he hopes to accomplish in his last year in the Senate. Then we will spend some time focused on his candidacy, why he decided to throw his hat in the ring, and why he thinks he is the best candidate to represent the 2nd Congressional District. We will talk about the district makeup and what topics matter most for Minnesotans across it. Lastly, we will circle back on the Minnesota legislature and break down our thoughts on this year's session. Will they get anything accomplished? And if so, what? How will the tone and bipartisanship be? And what will the messaging be coming out of session leading into the 2026 election? A lot to get into today, so thank you for joining us and enjoy the show. We are excited to be joined today by State Senator Matt Klein, who is also a candidate for the 2nd Congressional District this year. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Michael and Becky. Appreciate it.
We are going to get into all the nitty-gritty of the election year, but want to start by talking about the legislative session just kicked off this week. You're a pro. You've been there for a good number of years so far, and we know that the vibe and the tone is a little bit different this year. Walk us through just a little bit about how the first day of session went and how things started off so far.
Yeah, it's a closely divided legislature, but I was so proud that Minnesota rose to the moment last year and actually passed a budget, passed it, close to on time. The first day was extremely emotional. It was a tribute to Melissa and Mark Hortman. It was a bipartisan tribute, and it felt after that was over that, yes, we have to carry on the work and they won't be here with us. And so there was a bit of a painful letting go in that moment, but we got through it, and now we are hunkered down to the work, and we will start the work of legislating. We had a floor session today.
Right to work, and it is there's certainly a lot of things that we know are on the horizon and possible. We know that the legislature passing your budget bill last year definitely doesn't have the weight of those deadlines this year, but there's a lot of things I think that folks want to get done. So you are serving as chair of the Commerce and Consumer Protection Committee. Talk to us a little bit about your priorities for that committee and what you're hopeful can get across the finish line this year.
Well, yeah, and it's an exciting year for that committee. There's going to be a lot of bills come forward that'll probably fall into partisan categories. A lot that people are going to offer about ICE and about school shootings and so forth. And unfortunately, those will have a partisan type of path. But the work that we're doing for consumer protections should be bipartisan, and we should be able to accomplish a lot in this moment. One of the biggest things is going to be data privacy. I think we all saw this creepy Super Bowl commercial where we can find your lost puppy if you just sign up for this global surveillance network owned by Amazon. We're going to hunker down on some bills that protect individuals' privacy if they're, if they have a video or if they have a camera or whatever. There's this issue with dynamic or surveillance pricing, which means that if I go to buy a burrito and they know some certain demographic criteria about me, they charge me one price for the burrito. But if Michael Brodkorb goes and they know different demographic, info about him, they'll charge him a different price. And that's just not right. It's not fair. We're going to find a way to hunker down and prevent that in this state. And then a really big thing is cryptocurrency kiosks. So we know that these things are targeting our seniors in communities. There are kiosks where you go and feed in your cash one bill at a time, and then supposedly you're buying cryptocurrency. It's defrauded hundreds of seniors. If you think about it, anyone who's serious about buying cryptocurrency is going to log onto an app or go on their laptop and have an easy time doing that. The only reason to sort of make you feed bills into a machine would be to defraud people. So we're going to crack down on that.
Just a few easy bills to get across the finish line, right? I mean, like no big feats whatsoever there. Those are certainly things that seem like they should have mass support. What is the nature of the support for the bills like that? Is it bipartisan in nature, or are these ones that you're going to be kind of battling up against at this session?
So this will be my 10th year at the legislature, and in the previous 9, I've sort of established a reputation as a bipartisan worker. That's who I am by nature, and that's how you actually get stuff done up here. I don't throw bombs on Twitter. I come here to do a job, and the job comes with expectations. So I strive to fill those. Interestingly, in the political realm, the data privacy stuff in particular carries the support of sort of the farthest right of our Senate members and also some of the more left-wing Senate members. There's people who have interest in that from all sides of the political spectrum. So I think those will have a lot of interest. And then when you talk about protecting seniors from fraud, that tends to be bipartisan as well.
You know, when I was doing a little bit of research on some of your bills leading up to this interview, I was super impressed. I mean, you have co-sponsors on some of the bills that you're leading, from Senators Housley and Duckworth all the way to Barr and Drazkowski. So certainly runs the gamut throughout the Republican caucus. And as you said, that's something that you have intentionally sought out over your decade up there, correct?
Yeah, I had the lobbying ban last year. After you serve in the legislature, you're not allowed to lobby for 2 years. Made good friends with Cal Barr and Senator Steve Drazkowski, who also support that. And unfortunately, didn't move anywhere. But there's always opportunities to find, bipartisan authors on things if you do a little labor on it, and it always makes a stronger bill.
One of the things, and you kind of mentioned it in the intro, is the tone this session. One of the things that Becky and I really like to talk about and talk with people about is how do they balance partisanship? And you've really, as Becky noted and as you noted, have really staked out a very good reputation, and we're working on both sides of the aisle. We obviously the last year leading up to this session was incredibly just terrible for this state, with the loss of Speaker Hortman, her husband, and the other shootings that went on. And how do you approaching working across the aisle when it's simultaneously such a hyper partisan environment right now? Because one of the things Becky and I, again, we really like is when we both grew up in a time before social media. And so we remember there was a lot more talking. But how do you approach that and balance that?
Well, I look at the forces coming into this session as being fairly unique. First of all, I think a lot of Republicans are very upset about fraud, but you know what? So are a lot of Democrats. And the Inspector General bill that was authored last year had bipartisan authorship, and we tried to move that through. We'll try that again this year, and that'll also be a bipartisan effort. I know there will be partisan shots fired on that bill because people are angry, at our current governor, about fraud. But I think if we really want to fix the problem, there's going to be a bipartisan opportunity. I would also say, and you alluded to the loss of Melissa Hortman, and then the recent sort of intrusion into our state by federal agents with the loss of our fellow Minnesotans. I think if you're coming to this job in this moment and you're still putting on that partisan jersey in the morning and treating it like Vikings versus Bears, and how am I going to embarrass the other side? I just don't think you've risen to the place that we are in history right now. It's time to really get stuff done. Minnesotans have shown us what they do. They go out with whistles. They go out with their cell phones. They show courage. They show compassion. They show industry. And for us to do less than that would be disappointing.
Just to be clear, though, if it was a Vikings versus Bears contest, which jersey would you be putting on?
I'd be wearing the purple.
That's good. You may not know this. I should have disclosed this. Becky is married to a Green Bay Packers fan, and I'm married to a Green Bay Packers fan. So I'm a very loyal Vikings fan. That was probably the closest to an ambush question we've ever gotten to put you on the spot about football, but you answered it the right way.
Well, it was a hard one. My wife is a Badger as well, so I think we're all in the same boat on this one. So
my wife is actually from Iowa, and so they have some spillover into Green Bay, but it really makes for a challenging football season. But we're all against the Bears. That's all that matters. Becky, next one to you, Becky.
Yeah. I'm curious because I totally appreciate what you say and rising above it, and I want to be very optimistic that that's what this session can really show to Minnesota and to the country. How is that reflective of your conversations up at the Capitol? Is that kind of to put it easy, is that kind of the vibe that you're getting from your fellow senators and representatives up there, that everybody seeks to at least start that way and really work hand in hand and to have a little bit more cordial nature of session?
Boy, with the qualifier that you added, that's how we will start. It certainly has been that way in the first 72 hours. Yes, obviously the first day we spent grieving the loss of Melissa and Mark and celebrating the return of John Hoffman. There was just everyone in the chamber, in the Senate chamber. It didn't matter whether you were an R or a D. You were glad to see each other again and to touch each other and hold each other close and support each other in this moment. And then, today we sort of honored the work of Senator Bruce Anderson, a Republican who has passed away in the interim. And similarly, there were outpourings of support and compassion from both parties. So it seems like we're starting out on a civil bipartisan foot. We'll see how long it holds. I think you just got to keep working on it every single day.
There's been some security changes at the state capitol. And I think, what's your take on those? My sense is those are good. But what's your take on some of those security changes?
Yeah, if you've seen the Senate chamber, if you've been to the Capitol, you see that we sit in a fishbowl. We're down below, and very up high in the rafters, there's this gallery. And people used to sort of have the permission and without scrutiny go up there with firearms. And after the death of Melissa Hortman, I don't think any of us felt comfortable that was going to be possible any longer, to be exposed to that kind of risk. So they do have metal detectors. They do know if somebody comes through with a weapon. You're allowed to come through with a weapon if you have a permit to carry. Otherwise, they will not let you through. And I think it's the right way to go. It's certainly going to change. You've been up at the Capitol, Michael, and you know how lobbyists sort of stand outside the two chambers, and that's how they interact with members and get their work done. They're now held at about a 30-yard distance, and I don't think they're very happy about it. But and that maybe is something we'll have to continue to negotiate.
I just want to say, as a citizen, but someone who's also worked up there, I think that there needed to be some adjustments, particularly after the last legislative session and what happened over the past summer. One thing that I think is so critically important is that Minnesotans have access to that space, but also simultaneously that those seeking elected office, that we understand that's their place where they work, and they have to do so in a safe and comfortable environment, both for legislators, both for staff, and others that are there. And I think they've struck a good balance, but we'll see where that goes. But I just wanted to get your take on it.
Yeah, and you know that in my other career, I'm a physician. I work at hospitals. Sir. And if you pass into any hospital these days, you pass through some basic security measures. It's just the reality of our public spaces in this moment. And certainly now that politicians are especially a target, we should do the right thing and make sure that they're safe.
Absolutely. Yep. I completely agree. Becky.
From your insider perspective, before we move on, what are you hopeful or optimistic about that will get done, that will get across the finish line? Are we going to see a completed bonding bill? Are we going to get some fixes to maybe some technical fixes? Are we going to see any tax bills? What's your take on what you, maybe on the optimistic side, think is going to get done, not just in your committee, but in the chambers as a whole?
Yeah, I think if we rise to the moment and we're serious, yes, we will pass a bonding bill. It's good for all of our communities. It's good for all of our districts. It's sorely needed in this moment just to maintain the infrastructure of the state. And we should be able to work across the aisle to get that done. The addressing the fraud issue and reassuring Minnesotans that we're serious about their tax dollars. And we're also serious about these programs that try to treat kids with autism or people staying home with disabilities. We've really got to regain some trust as a legislative body that we can handle tax dollars responsibly. Again, those bills are bipartisan, and I'm hopeful for those as well. I think, it's going to be a modest budget. I'm not sure if there will actually be a tax bill, but the other thing that we're going to do in the Commerce Committee, which should be bipartisan and I hope will get done, a huge industry is propped up in Minnesota with these prediction markets, Polymarket and so forth. It's raising billions of dollars in revenues for the people who operate it, but it operates currently within Minnesota with no guardrails or oversight or taxation whatsoever. I think it's really time that we in Commerce take a look at that industry, make sure it's not, using predatory practices or exploiting people. That insider information is actually permitted in those prediction markets. So you can make $1 million bet on something that you, Michael Brodkorb, know exactly is going to occur tomorrow, like Matt Klein's going to be on your podcast. So it's we got to have a little oversight there. So
it's like Back to the Future 2. I should have gotten the sports almanac and gone back and made a few predictions. You had mentioned fraud, and I think you had touched on the Inspector General bill. We had Senator Gustafson on, and we talked about that bill. We had Republicans on too, Chair Robbins of the Frog Committee. That seemed like a really good concept, that Inspector General bill. Do you think it's going to get over the hurdle this time?
Boy, I'm going to do everything I can to help out Senator Gustafson on that. And she's done good legislative work. She doesn't go on Twitter and ridicule her colleagues. She spends hours and hours with Democrats, Republicans, staff, research, council, everybody, to try to make sure that bill actually works and makes sense and will accomplish what it is intended to do. So for us to pass on the opportunity to turn that into Minnesota law would be a real disappointment.
No, I think it was a great piece of legislation. We enjoyed our conversation with her and both sides, and hopefully that's something that can pass, because I think that bill would help Minnesotans feel a little bit better about what's going on.
Yeah, we need to regain some trust, unfortunately. And we just have this kind of Scandinavian mentality in Minnesota, where for years and years we've thought, if you need assistance with childcare, you probably have a child, and then so unfortunately a lot of bad actors really took advantage of that and took advantage of it to the tune of billions of dollars. And so we've got to hunker down our protections and also regain some trust.
Completely agree. I think we've talked about that quite a bit through the fraud issue, through the ICE and immigration issues, that there's definitely been an erosion of some trust and accountability, from folks on both sides and the general voters and people of Minnesota. So I'm with you. I think that is something that's huge for the session this time around, and something that we've been hearing a lot of different places, that is a priority for members. So I appreciate you mentioning that as well.
Yeah.
We know one thing that is big this session is that we have a number of members who are running for other offices. So I want to get into one of my favorite topics, which is campaigning and elections. You have thrown your hat in the ring to run for the 2nd Congressional District. Walk us through that a little bit, of why that's important for you, the expertise you're going to bring from your experience as a doctor, as a senator, as a father, and as a constituent yourself, obviously, of the district, and why you decided to run.
Yeah, so CD2 is a fun and inspiring seat to run for, because it is probably the last swing seat in Minnesota, where it could go red or it could go blue with the right candidate and the person who works hard. And I take that as a challenge and an inspiration, that if you are kind of a problem solver and a hard worker and respectful and bipartisan in your approach, you can win this seat, and you can probably represent Minnesotans pretty accurately. So that's part of my inspiration for running. I just think I match the district, and I know I can get elected here. You're right. I've been a physician for 35 years. For the bulk of my career, I worked at Hennepin County Medical Center. More recently, I work at the Mayo Clinic. I'm an internal medicine guy. I work in the hospital. And in this moment, when we're going to face kind of a healthcare crisis in this nation, there's $1 trillion in medical assistance cuts coming our way. The tax credits are no longer available for folks who buy individual plans. And there's a raft of misinformation about our health from RFK Jr. about measles and polio, et cetera. So I think there's a role to play for a person with medical credentials and authority to step in and speak about the truth and stand up for it. And I also think there's going to be an opportunity, candidly, as this crisis hits with medical assistance cuts. It'll damage my old alma mater, Hennepin County Medical, in downtown Minneapolis, but it's also going to result in the shutdown of rural nursing homes and rural hospitals. And I think both Republicans and Democrats are going to be motivated over the next year to rebuild healthcare delivery in this country, maybe build it better than it has been built, improve access to mental health care, improve access to pharmaceuticals. So I'm inspired. I hope I'm in Congress a year from now, and I'm telling you that I'm working with Republican colleagues to make healthcare delivery in this nation better.
That's a great answer. I live in the 2nd Congressional District. I live in Eagan. I always will say that, and I agree with your analysis. It is the only, I think, kind of swing district this cycle in the state. It's going to be heavily targeted, one of the few swing districts in the country. But one of the things I think is interesting and comment, but also more of a comment, but also a question is, Representative Congresswoman Craig has done a very good job of reaching across party lines and working in a bipartisan way. She took a congressional district that Congressman Klein had represented for a number of years, and she really, particularly in the last 2 elections, has done a very significant job of winning and showing some strength. We talked about it a little bit at the state capitol, that kind of bipartisan message. But what are you hearing on the campaign trail from people? My sense is not to lead the witness, but my sense is that people want, aside from sometimes the partisan conventions, people want people to work together to just get stuff done.
Yeah,
is that your read of things? And
it's not only, she's obviously written the playbook. People forget that just 3 years ago, this was the closest swing seat. CD2 Minnesota was the closest swing seat in the nation. Hugely expensive race. Angie Craig obviously won it by 14 points. So she's written a playbook for us, and it's not that complicated. It's a rural and an urban district. You need to get out and form networks and learn about the issues that affect both of those areas. You need to actually listen to people and make sure that they feel represented. And it's a purple district. She's a center left type of leader. That's how I've operated as a Minnesota state senator. That's who I am. And so yeah, I think the voters of CD2 clearly are telling me that they want somebody who goes there and treats it as a job. It's a job that comes with expectations. The story I always like to tell, Michael, is, and I parallel it with my work in medicine. If I go into the hospital one day and there's a patient with appendicitis, and maybe there's a surgeon on and I don't get along with him, I don't like him, we don't agree on anything, we still both know that we have a job to do, that we have to have it done by the end of the day, and there's a patient there with expectations. That's exactly how I treat my job when I go to the legislature. We have 80,000 Senate district constituents who expect me to get something done today, and I plan to do it.
Bravo. Great answer.
Absolutely. Full disclosure, in 2018, I managed Jason Lewis's reelection campaign, which is unfortunately it was unsuccessful at that time, but have been very, very impressed with Angie Craig and what she has done in Congress since then. The district, I think, has certainly shifted a little bit, and she has represented that district well. And like you said, I mean, 14 points a couple years or last cycle, when just a few years ago it was represented by Republicans for quite a number of years, is an incredible shift. And also kind of reflects, I think, the unique nature of the district. You talked about it a little bit. It has some of that South St. Paul, Dakota County, goes down into Washington, and then down into some of those more rural areas that goes significantly to the right for Trump. Some strong MAGA voters down there.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about walking that line, because obviously in your district right now, you have a different type of district that you represent. Despite that, you have chosen and have been successful at being bipartisan and working across that aisle, something that you obviously have said that you would like to continue to DC. But talk to us a little bit about how working with constituents from the whole broad spectrum kind of shifts in this, and how you would manage and tackle that.
Well, that's been the most fun part about doing this campaign. We launched in March, and we've had pop-up meet and greets, at nice houses in Mendota Heights, obviously very close to St. Paul, and all the way down to, South and Northfield, which is farm country, and just the full spectrum of what the beauty of Minnesota is and the beauty of Minnesotans is. So that's been exciting. In my work as a physician, I've sat down with one patient at a time every single day for 35 years, and you become adept at quickly establishing areas of common understanding and quickly developing a mutual trust. That's, if you can't do it, you just can't do the job of a physician. And that's been my experience sort of running in CD2 as well. You do have to go talk to people who voted for Donald Trump if you're a Democrat. You do have to talk to people who may be much more progressive than I am. And yet you are able to look at each other in the eye, find an area of common understanding, and develop the trust that you're going to agree on some things and disagree on others. In my campaign, I have the endorsement, I'm really proud of this, of Zainab Mohammed, Senator Zainab Mohammed, who represents Minneapolis and is a Democratic Socialist. And I also have the endorsement of Senator Grant Hauschild, who represents the Iron Range, perhaps the most conservative senator in our caucus, but so that the full range of ideology within the Democratic Party is supporting my campaign. And I don't agree with those folks on everything. I disagree with them strongly on some things, but I think we trust each other, that we're going to advance the values of Minnesotans, the values of our party, and we're going to make sure we represent the people well.
That is an incredibly diverse spectrum of the Democratic Party. And I think that the way you described it is spot on. It doesn't necessarily mean you agree with every position they take, but to be able to collect endorsements from that kind of width of the party is impressive. And it's exactly the type of message, I think, the type of elected representative the people in the second district want. I mean, they recognize, my take is partisanship has a role. There's obviously these are partisan elections, but obviously the ability to sit down and talk with people from differing degree is important. And, getting endorsements from such diverse sections of the party is impressive. That's very impressive.
Yeah, that's what we need. Both parties probably need a little more big tent mentality, but certainly my party
yes.
does. And that's what I've run on. That's what I've been able to accomplish so far, and I think that's how you deliver results. I'm looking forward to it.
You one thing you discussed a little bit, made a reference to it, and I followed you on social media. So much of politics these days, I think, is hardwired to um, reward those who engage combatively on social media. That's not my style, and it's not Becky's, and I don't think it's yours. How do you break through in a campaign and in that type of environment where so much is about clicks and gotcha and ambush? How do you break through in that type of way?
Yeah, well, and thank you for your podcast for helping me to try, but it is hard because the algorithms reward outrage. And if you say go on and say something nasty about your Republican colleague down the hall, you'll get more likes than if you say something nice about them. And so it's tough. We're swimming against the tide, I think, on that. But one of the things we've done in our campaign is these pop-up town halls, just really getting back to very grassroots campaigning. So we will plan to be at a pub or a library for a certain amount of time on a Sunday afternoon. We'll send out a blast text to folks that might be supporters within a 5 mile radius. And in this moment in particular, people are really coming out for that. They like having community. They like talking about what's occurring in Minnesota. And then there's this very authentic sort of looking in the face and asking questions and seeing how somebody responds to that you sure don't get from social media. It's much healthier. And I think it builds a stronger and a more nourished campaign.
Bravo. Well said. Bravo.
I love that. I grew up in the grassroots system. I think that that is something that's incredibly important and that we've gotten, unfortunately, away from. And we've said, in interviews with other guests that sometimes it's harder to hate up close, right?
Yeah.
And so there is something, it just takes away a little bit of that disconnect, and just even if you might not like what the other person says, especially because I feel like it is so unique these days, to be willing to sit down with folks without having it screened, without having, a little extra control over what you're going to get and who you're going to interact with. I think it's really refreshing. And I'm sure folks that are coming, even if they don't necessarily agree with you or appreciate your politics, appreciate what you are doing and how you are getting out there and in front of them. And I think that's something I would like to see more of. And I understand why we don't, but it definitely should be applauded for that effort.
Well, thanks so much. And Michael Brodkorp's been a leader in this as well. He's tries to find good on both sides of the aisle. So I take him as a mentor.
I appreciate that, Senator. I hope that doesn't hurt your campaign too much. No, but I would agree. And it's, my wife and I, we have 3 kids. We keep them off social media because, and we encourage, we raise their civic IQ by having these conversations. And that's what we try to do in this podcast. And I think it's important. And I think we need to go back to that time where we're having those conversations. Because I will say to you, as you're discussing the second district, I mean, it is diverse. There is farmlands, and you get parts of West St. Paul that are close to being part of the inner city. It is a diverse district. In order to go through that, not everything's going to work in every part of the district, and so being in Mendota Heights, but down to Northfield and all across the district, you have to be able to connect with people. And I think the vast majority of people are not on social media as much. I don't think it's real life. So having someone running for office who has elected experience leading in a bipartisan way like you have, but also being, a doctor and having that relationship in talking with people, I think that, in all honesty, I think we need more politicians with good bedside manners. Is a great way of saying it, and I think that's why you're succeeding so much.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you saying that. This is what I try to, pitch to the voters in this moment. I've run 3 big elections in Washington County and Dakota County over the last decade. I won them all, of course, and then outperformed the top of the ticket in each one of them. So voters seem to respond to sort of the thing I'm bringing, which is problem solving, that experience with the medical community and lack of bomb throwing. So it's good to know that that's still what Minnesotans want and will reward.
We've talked a lot about, I live in the suburbs. Michael lives in the suburbs. Your district certainly encapsulates a good number of the suburbs, and in addition to more of that Twin Cities and rural aspect. And in particular, I think one of the big decision makers this cycle and the last few are going to be those suburban, more moderate voters, and in particular, suburban women, mothers. Talk to us a little bit about what you're hearing on the campaign trail from some of those national issues that are ranking highest for voters. Is it fraud? Is it price of eggs and daycare? Is it immigration? Is it all of the above?
Yeah, so well, we haven't talked about ICE yet in this interview, but that is a really big deal in the suburbs. Obviously, there's been a very large presence. The moms and dads that have been taking their kids to hockey and soccer over the last years now are out with whistles and their cell phones and are really activated by that. And I think, not all of those people started out as, red-blooded Democrats. I think a lot of them are just firm Minnesotans who sort of understand constitutional liberties and independence and compassion and caring for your neighbors. And they are really mobilized. I think I heard Zach Stevenson say on the opening day that group of people, tens of thousands of them who rose up spontaneously in this moment are probably the next wave of our political leaders in the state of Minnesota. So I think they will, in the suburbs in particular, have an outsized role in the results of the next elections at every single level. And that may be top of mind, although it's a long ways away, the election is. And then you talked about affordability. You bet. Affordability with healthcare, affordability with childcare is really huge. Higher education affordability, and then just your groceries with the tariffs that are coming through, and how people can't buy a carton of eggs any longer. So people are looking to see solutions at the state level. I've obviously championed the child tax credit, trying to reduce costs for low-income families. I've championed lower property taxes for seniors to try to help them stay in their home. Partial elimination of the tax on Social Security, again, to try to benefit our seniors who are on fixed incomes. And we need to do a lot more of that and make sure that, the large corporations like social media companies and so forth do pay their share in our state, and that we incentivize working families as they start their families.
Senator, in speaking about ICE, I just recently traveled over the last few days and speaking with some family out of state, and I made it clear to them that I thought what we've seen in the last few months in Minnesota will be in the history books in terms of how Minnesotans reacted to what occurred here. And I've said that it's one of the most largest kind of civic kind of uprisings that I've seen in quite some time. You remember, election goes well, you're a member of Congress. What type of reforms do you think need to be related to ICE? And in the interest of disclosure, I have long, over the last few weeks, have said this is an organization, this is a government entity that conservative Republicans should be talking about is in need of some reform and oversight. What do you think needs to be done with immigration enforcement, ICE, and how this policy is being implemented and what we've seen happen here in the state of Minnesota?
Yeah, I think the current sort of membership of ICE has destroyed their own credibility with the way they've handled things here. And so we need to sort of clean house at that organization and start over. People in Minnesota do believe in safe borders. They also believe in safe, expeditious, and legal immigration, which is how we build up our workforce in this country. And we need to move forward on that and guarantee it. We also do need to have some sort of review and judicial inquiry into what has occurred here in Minnesota with the violations of individuals' civil liberties. So I think those are really important parts. You'll see a raft of legislation from Democrats in the state Senate this year to try to assert some of those constitutional rights. And in my own role as a doctor, we know that I've worked with law enforcement, for example, at Hennepin County for years and never had a problem. There was always a clear professional understanding that they have a job to do and we have a job to do, and patient privacy will be respected and physicians will be able to care for their patients. Unfortunately, ICE has not had that same professionalism, and they've intruded into patient care spaces, they've violated patient privacy, and they've intimidated our patients. So one of the biggest bills that I will be promoting at the state level this year will be establishing hospitals, clinics, and schools as protected spaces.
Well said. Well said. And I think Becky, and not to do too much analysis during the year, but I will say that I think is that is the centrist mainstream position, what he just articulated. That is the 60 plus 70% in polling position. And I think that that's going to be part of the reason why I think Democrats do so well this election cycle, as what we've seen unfolded and how leaders like Senator Klein are speaking up and offering some real common sense reforms that homeless Republicans like me are going to be like, yeah, that's where we need to go.
Yeah, I'm glad to do it. It's the right thing to do in this moment.
Absolutely. And like you said, we don't know how much how the heat's going to be, how the temperature is going to be on this issue as we get to November. But even if, as distance comes, it fades a little bit, I think it is certainly still going to be a really top issue for voters here in the state, even in November. I mean, we know a lot of other things can pop up, but it has been huge. It has been emotional. It has affected and impacted lives, and, it has woven through everything, right? As you mentioned before, some of those folks that have this is their kind of pinnacle of them getting involved in politics. That's how my friends are, folks my age, young parents in the suburbs. I mean, this is when I look at my social media, it's no longer just those folks that have been active year after year who are posting things and sharing their opinions. It is so widespread, and I really think it's going to be a big changer of how folks act and vote this cycle and moving forward.
Well, and I've said the same thing, Michael, that you've said, which is the history books are going to write about the Minnesota resistance as a true phenomenon. And it's unbelievable that it sprang up spontaneously. It involved tens of thousands of people. They managed to very quickly become highly trained. They were extremely nonviolent and thoughtful in their approach and highly effective. And I don't know of a lot of resistance movements in history that I can compare to that. It was Minnesotans showed their true colors, and their true colors won.
Yeah, absolutely. And great point. I was out of state and I was talking to them about how this was not like this was everywhere, particularly in the suburbs. I mean, again, live in Egan, I was talking to moms and dads who were really getting involved in wanting to make sure that people were being looked out for. And Minnesotans spoke up. And I think the manner in which Minnesotans spoke up is going to be something that's going to be talked about. And I do hope that there is, aside from some structural reforms, I do hope there is some oversight and some detailed inquiries, analysis, and investigation into conduct here, because we're going to learn a lot more. And I think the more Minnesotans learn about what's happened here in the last few months, the more it's going to propel them to continue to stay engaged and be involved.
I agree. Yeah.
As we close out here, we are following session, things are really going to start moving. We have, I mean, during session, even you're going to start having your local district conventions, going towards endorsing conventions, towards the primary in general. Walk us through a little bit about how that looks for you, how you're going to, get out there and fight the good fight for your district and campaign, and how you're feeling about things.
Yeah, well, I think one of the best ways I can campaign is just by being a really solid legislator. As you say, that's what the district rewards, somebody who comes here and does the work and gets results for Minnesotans. So I think the best way I can campaign is to pass some legislation about fraud this coming year, pass some legislation about affordability, and get a bonding bill across the road, all the sort of bread and butter stuff that Minnesotans send us here to do. Obviously, we'll continue to work through the convention process. We'll continue to have those pop-up town halls and be present on interviews like this. And that's important too, to connect with Minnesotans. But my first job right now is to be a good senator.
Senator, we want to thank you so much for being here today. Please consider coming back. We'd love to hear about session updates. And then throughout the summer, we get closer into November, we'd love to have you back on and talk about the campaign, how your campaign for Congress is going. Could not have appreciated more of your time today, sir.
Well, thank you so much, Michael, and Becky, and the folks who are watching this can learn more about me at kleinforcongress.com.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Becky, we just finished an interview with State Senator Matt Klein, who is a doctor and is also running for Congress in the greatest congressional district in the state of Minnesota, the second. Your take on the interview?
I mean, I thought it was great. I think, one thing that I love of a member, an elected, a candidate, is somebody who does seem like they're in it for the right reasons and want to make a difference, not just, get fame or power or whatever it might be. And he truly seems to care. I love his history and track record of working bipartisanly. Shout out Rachel Stassenberger with that word. But across the aisle, I think that's something that he has done for, looking back through his last decade in the legislature, and something that I hope, if he is the next candidate or next congressperson from the 2nd Congressional District, that he could bring to Washington. It is a hyper-partisan time, something we're seeing a lot of emotions, but it's clearly something that he's made a priority and seeks to continue on should he get elected to Congress.
I don't know I know when we started doing guests, but when we decided we always throw it to you first, that gives you the benefit of getting the best take first. And that was a fan. And so I completely agree with you. The way you described it, I liked it. I think he's going to do a great job. First opportunity that I've had to speak with him. It's a competitive district. He's competing against some other Democrats, but boy, I was impressed. As I get older, I am becoming more and more of a fan of legislators and elected officials who are not on social media to that type of way. Obviously, he has a campaign presence, he has a legislative presence, but just his approach and style, how he approaches his work as a legislator. But the portion of interview we also discussed the campaign for his campaign for Congress. I think it was just a great interview, and I think he's going to do very well in the race. And I think that there is something. I think there is something happening with politicians and social media, and I don't think it's just me, but I think people are really starting to, at least I think in Minnesota, appreciate those who are they're just kind of doing the work. And seems to be someone, and just in researching him and doing the leading up to the interview, someone who's just that servant legislator, someone who's out there, that kind of just dedicated public servant. And I think it's going to be a fascinating race. It is going to be the only competitive district in the state, the competitive district in the state of Minnesota, the Congressional District. There'll be some other races, but I think his approach as a state senator, his work as a doctor, and how he's running his congressional campaign, I think Senator Klein is going to do very well. And as I noticed in the interview, the second congressional district might be represented very soon again by another Congressman Klein, who was the congressman from 2002 until 2014.
Yep.
Yep. Congressman Klein on the Republican side, Congressman John Klein. And now we could be
2016, I think.
Yes, and we could be represented. I could be represented again by Congressman Matt Klein, who just a great interview, and I hope we have him back, because some of the issues he was talking about at the legislature, aside from the campaign, would be great for us to talk and have him on. And it was a wonderful opportunity. And thanks for making it work.
Well, thank you for setting it up. It was a good one, and obviously a district that I think is fascinating to watch because it does have such a diverse constituency, with coming so far up into Dakota County, but then also going so far down to southeastern and southern Minnesota. I mean, it really has the far right, has the far left, has the middle, and something that candidates need to appeal to. And it takes an interesting person to be able to do that. And I think I love the old school grassroots town halls that he's doing. I think it fits the district really well, and I'm not surprised that it's being really well received.
I did not know about his endorsements from both kind of the representative wings of the party. And I think that is also I think I'd be curious to ask you to what degree you consider yourself a homeless Republican, and me the same. I don't know. I think that really shows, I think, the width and depth of the DFL party. You can get those kind of factions. Do you see that too? Because I was pretty impressed by, the kind of, where those two state senators are on the kind of on the ideological kind of partisan landscape on the DFL side. That's a pretty big range. I mean, you're talking Minneapolis all the way up to northern Minnesota in terms of two elected officials representing different kind of factions or aspects of the DFL party. I don't know that we have something like that on our side, or to what degree it is our side.
No, I agree. And I think, to me, that is something that kind of transcends the political nature of things and goes further into like the character and who a person is, right? Like I think
Correct.
that if folks from different sides of a party, or even different parties can all rally behind somebody, I think it makes me, from just looking at it, objectively, makes me think that that is somebody who is a good person, is trustworthy, is in it for the right reasons, and wanting to make life better for Minnesotans, for Minnesota companies, business owners, and young people. And I think that's something that Because obviously it's not individuals who are looking at his policies and saying, I believe with him, ride with him 100% of the time, because they certainly don't. But I think that's something that is a good testament to who the candidate is as a person and as a candidate when you see something like that.
Here's an interesting take that I just thought of. Last two interviews have been with doctors and with candidates. Is there something about Senator Jensen, former state senator Scott Jensen, who we did interview with, who's a doctor, and then Senator Matt Klein? Obviously, different political philosophies, different perspectives. But one thing I would say about our interview with Jensen is, you know, he obviously ran in 2022, and I liked Jensen. I have really started to like Jensen more since he got out of that mode from his 2022 race. But both former Senator Jensen and Senator Klein are both doctors. And one of the things that I said in the interview with him was, I think it's good to have elected officials with good bedside manners in terms of their ability to connect with people. I'm wondering, did we notice something there? Is there a similarity in job profession?
I mean, I hadn't put a whole lot of thought into it until you just mentioned it, but I do think kind of the frankness and comfortability having those conversations, it didn't feel rehearsed. It didn't feel like a bunch of talking points. It just felt like having a conversation about what they truly thought and believed. And I think that probably does come from a little bit of that profession, because you do go in and sit with folks, and I'm sure you get some folks who just want to talk about the medical side of why they're there and what they are, and then you get folks who talk about their dog and their grandma and what they did last weekend and their favorite game and color, and you kind of have to entertain all of that. And so I think being able to bounce back and forth between conversations and the comfortability and just the approachability, maybe, I think is something that seemed a little similar between those two. I'm all for the bedside manner on the campaign trail, apparently.
Yeah. One thing I would not have thought when we started our podcast in 2022 that we would do 3 interviews with Scott Jensen. And I think that those interviews that we did with Jensen, I could do an interview with Scott Jensen every week. I mean, I think that and I felt that way with speaking with Senator Klein. We could have gone on for like another hour. And I think that he would have just, because it's, not to take away from any other guests we've had or any of our interviews, but I just, that kind of, again, that bedside manner approach, I think being just something of note. I just noticed it. So thought I'd share it with you.
I love it. I do want to transition us. We chatted a little bit with Senator Klein about the state legislative session that is going on. Obviously, campaigns are ramping up. We're going to be spending a lot of time talking about that. But this is kind of where we sit this week. We had session kickoff. And I think, we want to break this down a little bit and chat through what we anticipate, where things stand, maybe some predictions, and then, of course, as we wrap up session, see if we were right or wrong, or hopefully I was right and you were wrong, and go from there. All right, so starting off, we discussed briefly with Senator Klein, but obviously session kicked off with a tribute to Speaker Hortman, and it was a really nice tribute to her service, to her dedication. If you watched it, I'm sure you watched the videos as I did. After, there was some great tributes from the leaders, from Governor Walz and others in the House chamber. And then folks filed out and one by one left roses on her desk, which they are going to kind of keep as a tribute. They also had a bouquet of flowers on a seat that her husband Mark sat in when she was sworn in as Speaker in 2019. And it was just a heartbreaking but beautiful tribute and testament to Speaker Hortman and what she did, how she served, and who she was.
I thought it was, yes, it was whoever was involved in the planning of that, the for lack of a better phrase, the pomp and the circumstance, the planning and the thoughtfulness, did a tremendous job. I can't imagine being involved in the planning of that, but whoever did a remarkable job. It was difficult to listen to. It was emotional. I can't imagine being in the chamber and experiencing it. And again, my thoughts or prayers are with the Hortman family, with Senator Hoffman and his family, which I'm sure it's traumatizing to be at the state capitol. I think for any legislator and staff after the events of the last year, And so my thoughts and prayers are with the Hoffmans, with the Hortmans, their children, everyone that's serving staff, everyone that's partaking in the legislative process. But it was just a very, very thoughtful and emotional event. And again, my compliments to who was involved in the planning, because I'm sure that was very difficult to do.
I do want to read a little bit of a quote from the new DFL leader, Zach Stevenson, from his tribute. He said, "It's going to be such a difficult thing to have a legislative session without Melissa Hortman, the most consequential speaker in Minnesota history, but also a friend and mentor to so many of us in the chamber. In fact, of the 134 members in the Minnesota House, only one member can remember a session without Melissa Hortman. Everyone else has never served without Melissa Hortman. So we're going to have to take some time to remember her." And I think that is just fascinating, the widespread impact and interaction that she had on the fellow members in that chamber. And that is certainly something that we are going to see and feel as we move forward.
Yeah, I would agree. I thought his remarks were just perfect.
And then Senator John Hoffman also received a standing ovation. And when he spoke, he said, "When you survive an attempted assassination, you look at the world differently. What remains is what truly important: family, community, and the responsibility that we have to care for one another." And he added, "The people of Minnesota are not asking us to be harsher. They're asking us to be steady. They're asking us to lead." And as we've discussed with Senator Klein, that is something I want to be optimistic. I am hopeful that at least a session starts off in a way that is a little bit more amicable, but I do want to chat through what kind of session this truly will turn out to be, and kind of maybe take off those rose-colored glasses a little bit, because I do think it is an election year. Politics is everywhere. It's been a really up and down and partisan off season here as we let up to the session, and I anticipate some of that's going to move into what session looks like. So starting off, we have Governor Walz is in his lame duck session. What is your take on his role in session? Is he going to seek out anything to have one last big win for a lasting legacy? Does he kind of shrink away and, just let things run their course and no damage is done? What's your take on how he will act or react this session?
I don't, first of all, he is lame duck. And as I've mentioned before in the podcast, I think he's going to test the boundaries of what a lame duck governor can do. I think he's going to be forceful. I will say that I think that I've had some criticisms of some of his approaches, particularly during what happened with ICE. Not necessarily, I was opposed to what he was attempting to do related to ICE, but some of the tone and rhetoric. And so my hope would be that he would rise to the occasion and try. And I think one of the advantages of being a lame duck is obviously the main one is you're not coming back. And so what do you use that time for? Do you use that time to cement your legacy? Do you use your remaining political capital to bring people together? I don't know. But what I do believe is that I don't think he's going to go quietly. I don't think he's going to be quiet. And how he chooses to do that is his prerogative. I know what I would do, what my preference would be. My preference would be is that he would use the opportunity in this remaining session to try to get as much accomplished in a bipartisan way. But I'm old-fashioned in that sense. I've come to that realization and that may be Pollyannish on my part, because as much as I think the tone that started things off, we get into that more, I think the session is going to become what we normally think it to be. So the only thing I can say is I think he's not going to go quietly into the night. You?
Yeah, I agree on that. I don't think that he is going to be the one that maybe starts the mudslinging, but I do think he'll participate. I anticipate that this Trump Walz fight is not just over and done with. I anticipate that there will be some more kind of that mudslinging going on and some harsh words. I'm hopeful. I hope people are, even in a political year or an election year, I hope that they can, have the temperature be somewhat neutral. But I do think that, like you said, I think he's going to get a little fiery. I think he's going to be a good Democrat mouthpiece and messenger as they head towards the 2026 election, and try to do what he can do to bring back a Democrat trifecta in 2027.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to. The question was aptly framed. What is Walz going to do? I mean, I think that Republicans are going to work just as hard to come back and have a majority in the House or have it tied, and I think we can get into that. But I think this an election year session is always a partisan one, and independent of the dynamics that are at play outside of the state capitol. And so there's no reason for me to think that this is not going to be as partisan of an election as there was before, because I think some of the forces, sadly, and I mean that sadly, some of the forces at play are beyond what occurred last session. If we had not, and I mean this in the most respectful way, if we had not, I mean, we had the Hortmans, we had the assassination attempts on the Hoffmans. We had Annunciation. We had a number of just bad things that happened. And then we had, the introduction of ICE into the state. So I think it's pretty difficult for this legislative session to not be nationalized in some way. And in the process of not kind of nationalizing the legislative session, which is nothing wrong with that, I think some of the ability to kind of work together goes to the wayside. And that's too bad, but I think that's just the reality we're in.
I'm also curious your take on how things for the members move forward, in particular when it comes to immigration and ICE. It's a deeply personal, emotional topic for a lot of folks. We have immigrant legislators. We have folks who represent large immigrant communities. It is something that I think we get into different policy areas that do lean on this more emotional and personal side of things. But do you think as we move forward with this kind of temperature being so risen so far, over the last month or so here in Minnesota, how do you think that plays in? Do you think we're going to, are you optimistic that members can moderate their tone? Or do you think we'll see some of the doubling down that we've seen from some of these members on social media and in the press over the last month?
I'm an internal optimist. I'd love to believe that it would be toned down. I don't think it will. What happens in these kind of rhetorical standoffs is someone says something obnoxious and then someone responds and has to double down. And it's just this kind of this one-off that just happens. And again, repeating a message, which I've said in the last few episodes, but particularly with this interview with Senator Klein, the legislators that I think that are off social media are the ones that I think can do a better job, I think, of not feeding into that kind of rhetorical game and feeding into the algorithms and feeding into that type of rhetoric that can get incendiary. I am never going to be, I'm a First Amendment absolutist. I love the passion, love the campaigns, understand the role of politics. Don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think that social media, there is a lot of staging and acting and performance art that has become to get clicks. And again, I'm becoming more inclined to like the legislators and the work that they do, that they're less on social media engaging in that, because I don't think it's much of a thoughtful space. My hope is that there can be some substantive reforms. I think Republicans, putting on my partisan hat, would benefit from a thoughtful and thoughtful debate and discussion on ICE, the role of ICE, what they did in this state. This is an organization, this is an agency that is screaming for reforms and screaming for some oversight. And I don't think that should be occupied just by the center left. It has been. I have seen far too many Republicans going out there and saying that everything ICE did was great and everything they did was justified. And that's just not, I think, a credible position. Not even ICE is saying everything that they're doing, they did was right. And we're picking and choosing this stuff. So I would like to see thoughtful immigration discussions. because I think you and I have framed this out is we know, I mean, wasn't a Trump person, but I understand that the vast majority of Americans that voted for Trump, many of them believed that there was going to be some type of aggressive immigration approach. You and I were pretty clear, independent of how we voted, that we didn't think it was going to be realistic to do it the way that the Trump campaign was advertising. But they did. And I think we've seen in Minnesota where that would kind of went off the rails. My hope would be, again, putting on my partisan Republican hat, is that Republicans would meet that moment and speak to those issues, talk about where there can be some needs for some reforms, more opportunities for partnerships. I want to think that that can happen. I'm trying to be more optimistic than I am Pollyannish, but your take, what's your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I would like to be optimistic as well. Unfortunately, I do think that emotions, especially when their speeches back and forth, it's hard to not let that take over. But when we sit down and look at the two, I mean, immigration and fraud, two of the major issues that are before the session, regardless of whether what the legislature actually gets done, but in their conversations about this, is something echo what I said a couple episodes ago that I think while apples and oranges here can be approached in a very similar fashion of we have major flaws, major issues going on between ICE, between our government agencies here and the fraud going on. We need to take a step back, look at where the issues are, find out how to fix them so that this does not continue to happen going forward. And I think the members or party who can kind of take that high ground approach to both issues, I think as a way to win. I mean, we talked about it with Senator Klein, and I think that we're seeing this in the polls. The trust of our political institutions right now are at like all-time lows. I mean, people are just really don't know who to believe. The left hates the right hates the left, and it's just this erosion of who can we listen to, who can we believe, who's fighting for us and going to make real changes. And I think if we can see some of that, again, optimistically, see folks, if we can see Governor Walz and the Democrats looking inward and holding some accountability within the Walz administration on some of this fraud issues and start to really weed out some of those bad actors and address the fraud. Similarly, if we can see from Republicans the willingness to have that joint investigation, to look inwardly, to put in different safeguards and guardrails for ICE, for the agents, for border control, to make sure that they have more trainings to weed out those bad actors. I mean, I think there's a parallel to both of these things that I would like to see: accountability, trust, and just an overall more kind of cohesion, and something that I would like to think that both sides can get behind. But again, in an election year, everything is political, and so that certainly is a tough spot to be in.
You laid out a very good connection point. You connected those issues quite well in terms of looking inward. Both Republicans looking at ICE and their operations and Democrats looking at fraud. That's a very thoughtful way in which to do that, because it seems that your message then is both sides need to be willing to kind of look inward.
And without doing so, I think you lose your ability to attack on the other one. I think if Republicans aren't willing to do that, they lose their ability to look at Governor Walz and say, you got crap going on within your administration and within your agencies. You need to figure out. If they're not willing to do the same with the Trump administration and ICE, and vice versa, if the Democrats aren't willing to do that within Walz administration and the fraud issue, but demand that of Trump and ICE and those agencies, I just don't understand. I just don't personally feel how it feels very hypocritical to do it one way and not understand and accept that it needs to be done in both ways. Again, they're going to do it. We're going to see a lot of it. And, I plan to call some of that out.
First of all, that's probably the best take I've heard in the legislative session. And my compliments to you on that approach. Who do you think? You got a marker on where you think who's going to be more introspective?
I mean, I think the Democrats, to be perfectly honest. I think
the Democrats are going to be more willing to say we need to fix fraud. Okay.
than Republicans on immigration. One, because I think Republicans are going to try to punt and say, well, we're not in Congress, right? They're, what can we do? But Republicans have to, they have the Trump and the MAGA lane to worry about. They have that other aspect of campaigning. All of them are up this election cycle. And so I think there is a little bit more difficulty. I mean, we heard from Senator Klein that, the Democrats do want to do something on fraud. And I think there's a place where they can probably claim some wins by doing some minimal things on fraud, where Republicans, I think, have a larger step to accomplish, to feel those wins on the immigration ICE side of things. So I feel as though the Democrats probably could navigate this a little bit more successfully, just because they don't have to worry about that Trump angle, especially because Walz is not running for re-election. So they don't have to worry as much. Not that they're going to tarnish his name. I don't expect anybody to come out and trash Walz, Governor Walz, and what he's done, but they don't have to walk that line as carefully as I think Republicans do with Trump and immigration.
I don't say this lightly, and I don't think I've said it very often. Brilliant. I'm as you're
Thank
going
you.
through the analysis, I'm like, man, she's right. Like that's this is the session to be introspective. This is the session to say, and you've said something. You've taken it much more to a better perspective than I'd ever thought about. But looking at fraud and the need for reforms, looking at ICE and the need for reforms, and seeing the similarity and the way you broke that down, that's a fantastic way to look at it. Because if you remember when I was talking with Senator Klein, I said that this should be a reform issue for Republicans. But you took it multiple steps further, and you've connected two issues that if you're the average taxpayer, if you're the average person sitting at home, I think you're thinking about it from your way, I think. And again, not to say that we discussed this on the last episode about some of that polling, Becky, where it's like I don't think we're doing a show to be right about polling. Okay, but we're just kind of speaking our perspectives. I think a lot of people sitting at home would say, yeah, the government needs to do a better job about fraud, and the government needs to do a better job about ICE. And you bringing those two together and saying, okay, if I'm a taxpayer sitting at home, if I'm a voter at home, I should say, you nailed that. And
Well,
you gave that analysis free on our podcast.
For free. If you would like to pay me, I would happily take money.
That is fantastic. I mean, that's how you shape that up. And I completely agree with you, because that's where I think the demographic is. I mean, you've just come up with something that I think, we've talked about soccer moms. We've talked about the double haters. We're talking about, those type of voters. If you are a government, help me with this. If you're like a government reform kind of efficiency in government type person, you can be kind of, let's clean up ICE and let's clean up fraud. Because, look, and this is the thing that frustrates me. Not even ICE is saying everything that ICE did is right. But we have some elected Republicans going out there and saying, well, everything ICE did was great. When even ICE isn't saying everything they did was great.
And I think especially when you talk, like I think about, have my mom in the back of my mind, a suburban mother herself, and somebody who is not, never staked a flag strongly in either party, always voted, always instilled the importance of that, but never really got into who she was voting for or why, and, all of the nitty gritty of that. I think that she is somebody who, she reads, watches the news every night and reads the newspaper and is very in tune with what's going on in the communities, and more so probably like the Anoka County Union than the Star Tribune, right? I mean, she is reading, that's kind of where she is. And that's where I feel like we have so many of these voters, and the decision makers, I feel like, for this cycle are the folks that are looking at this and just want the common sense. Not the Republicans are going to vote Republican, Democrats are going to vote Democrat. We know that's the case. We've been seeing a lot of polls of those independent swing voters and where they're going, and they just want something done. They want progress to be made, and they want some movement. And I think I always just look at as somebody appealing to my mom and what she's going to want to hope and see. And she's not going to want the dirty nastiness. She's just going to want somebody who's going to sit down and say, you know what? shit's breaking all over the place, let's fix it. And she's going to gravitate towards that person or that party or that group that is willing to look inward aside from politics. And so I expect that we'll have some members doing some of that. I hope we have enough that can make a true difference. But being an election year, I think we have to take that into consideration. And leading me to my next conversation or question for you is, with the added dynamics of folks in the legislature running for other offices. We've got some members running for governor, we've got some members running for Congress, we've got all sorts of different things at play. What role do you think that plays in what gets done? In particular, I think we've seen, Lisa Dameth, the speaker on that House side for the Republican, is running for governor. We already have seen one of our Republican challengers, kind of criticize her for working with Walz to get the deal done last session. How does that work out, and how does that play if she works with Democrats in Walz? Is that going to be a win for her? Is that going to be to her detriment? What's your thought on her and just in general of members running for higher office and how that impacts a legislative session?
As you're asking the question, I'm just trying to make sure I'm running through the election tables. I think, push back if you think I'm wrong, but I think she's in the most precarious position as an elected official. She is the speaker seeking the Republican endorsement for governor. And so she's abiding by the endorsement. And so her message this legislative session is going to need to be that she can deliver conservative results, that she can deliver on those results. And so the question is, will she be able to? And so I think that going through this legislative session, if her argument on the campaign trail, and again, push back if you think I'm wrong, is I delivered as speaker, then this legislative session where she is in that speaker role, I think there's a responsibility on her then to deliver. And so what does she deliver on? Well, she's going to have to deliver not just, and this is where I think Republicans, are very difficult to work with. I mean, particularly the party activists are going to be problematic. I think someone like Senator Klein, who's endorsed by a number of legislators, but two that represent, I think, completely different lanes inside the Democratic Party. I think the Republican activists take the approach of, if the session goes well and things get accomplished, that's bad. That there's been some, because they always kind of want to take the approach of, everything, let's shut it down, let's burn it down, let's do all this stuff. So Dameth has to walk a bit of a tightrope. I mean, she has to walk that balancing act of being the speaker, making sure the institution of the House runs successfully, while simultaneously delivering some red meat to the Republican activists, which they're going to want to see, while simultaneously not hindering her chances in a general election when she runs, assuming the presumption is it will be Senator Klobuchar. And so that is a very precarious position that I think that she's in. It's going to be interesting to watch how she balances that, because I would say that Republican activists are not very kind to those who serve in elective office. And it's been one of my longtime criticisms of Republican activists, is that they don't reward the bench. If you come from the bench is the swamp. And so they want people outside of the system, whereas Democrats have, I think, a much better job of supporting, candidates at the local level, running for state legislature, and then running for higher office. And so my take is, at the local level, this legislative session, the one who's got the most to lose and potentially some to gain is Speaker Dameth. Or also Chair Robbins. I mean, she's going to have to draw some contrast. If she's going to stay in the governor's race, she's going to have to draw some contrast. And so does she take a harder edge? Does she try to maneuver some chess moves and some political moves to make her seem more palatable to the Republican base, the Republican delegates at the state convention? Did I answer? Give me a grade, and
Yeah,
do you
no,
agree, disagree?
A plus. I think that it's going to be. I am not envious of Dameth's team and the speaker herself trying to figure out how to navigate this. I do think that one thing that she probably can and would use to her benefit is, from what I understand, how the power structure breakdown is, her having the gavel means she controls the floor, schedule, calendar, what's brought up. So I would assume or think that it might even be not as much of what she is able to get past as speaker, but what she's able to block. And I would anticipate that there's a lot of, Democrats tried to pass gun control and I blocked that. Democrats are trying to do X, Y, and Z and I blocked that. And using her role as kind of that backdrop. Obviously, I think you can't just be against things, you need to be for things. And I think that she certainly will counteract that. But that's something that someplace where I see her being successful in kind of navigating that. Because with it such narrow margins, both sides are going to look at the political ramifications of every vote, every bill, and how that works. And I think Democrats are also not going to want to give her those wins, right? They're not going to want to give her something to go out on the campaign trail and tout as a big, massive win and success of this session. So I think there's going to be a little bit of that from both sides that, they're to figuring out how to navigate. I think one additional thing that she has to her benefit is if the straw poll results are any indication, she's done a lot of the legwork. She's established a lot of those relationships leading up to the start of this legislative session. And so hopefully she can, if she's going to come out successful from that endorsement, she would use that to her benefit of some of those folks that she already has on her side and hopefully would stay on her side if as she's seeking the endorsement. But I do think we look for, as every speech from Robbins and from Dameth and other candidates running, every speech on the floor or in committee is a campaign speech as well, right? I mean, they're going to have that mindset in every time that they raise their hand, they participate in a press conference, they participate in any sort of interview or legislative process. And so it definitely has an impact on how things are going to play out. It'll be interesting to see how large of an impact.
The other dynamic is, as you were thinking about this and you were thinking about the blocking that she's going to need to do, this adds a wrinkle in terms of Walz. I mean, when she announced Walz was running, that was going to be her opponent. So having Walz tied to the legislative outcome, you had in essence a proxy fight between Walz and Dameth through their campaigns. Now that dynamic's gone. She is the only, help me out here, but I think she's the only one that's running statewide that has a real tie to it. I mean, obviously the legislative leaders in each caucus, including the speaker, obviously want their legislative caucuses to come back in the majority, independent of individual elections. But my point is that that just adds, she's in that's even a further precarious position because who she's negotiating with of one of the people is someone in Walz who obviously didn't want her to succeed before, but the fact that he's not running, he can, as I said, not go quietly into the night. And I think that's going to be very interesting to see how that balances, because I've seen some self-identified advocacy groups in the right throwing markers down as to what their expectation is for this legislative session. And I think you framed it up correctly, that what can she get accomplished, but also what can she block?
And then I guess my last real question of you for predictions is, do you think a bonding bill will get done?
I don't know, because here's why: the endorsement. I will tell you, not playing. I mean, you and I are not working for advising any campaigns on either side, but I don't see how a bonding bill, as you're going through the endorsement process, benefits a Speaker Dameth. Mm-hmm. I don't. Someone want to explain that to me, they can. But there is an opportunity where it's one thing for there to be a wish list that center right or far right advocacy groups want to see accomplished, but passing a bonding bill, this is where it becomes a problem, and what role she has as Speaker to, in essence, block some of that stuff. The whip activity. I mean, Leader Niska is, manages the Republican side, but a lot of that will be fodder at a state convention, particularly when there is a rival of Speaker Dameth in that caucus, which is Chair Robbins. And so the question is, where does that happen? Your take on a bonding bill?
The only way, I mean, if I draw my line in the sand, I say no. I don't think it's going to happen.
No, because of math
Spending
or
more
because of the governor's race?
because of the governor's race. I mean, I think spending more money when we're heading towards a deficit, I don't think bodes well for fiscal conservatives. And especially after we've seen what has happened with spending under Governor Walz, I think that's something that a lot of folks would be looking at, unless it is largely infrastructure focused, because I do think there is an economic angle to do. But again, I think that gets a little in the weeds. I think that's a little too technical, something that not when you're explaining you're losing, and I don't think that's something that the delegates would be receptive of. I also just think it's a place where I expect, I mean, first of all, who knows what is going to be going on in Minnesota or in the world tomorrow, let alone a month from now. And so we know that some of these issues can just like completely hijack the session. But I also think that with the added political nature, with the heightened emotions of things, I wouldn't be surprised if some of these issues are held hostage a little bit in terms of, just not moving forward, playing the technicality side of things and punting back to committee and doing processes and, calendars and all of that kind of messy behind the scenes work that can just be where bills go to die. And so I'm just not overly optimistic about Republicans wanting to spend a couple hundred millions of dollars ahead of the 2026 election cycle. Then again, I stranger things have happened, so who really knows?
Yeah, no, I think I think great take. Great take.
So putting a couple predictions out there so we can have fun conversation in a couple months about what we were right on or wrong on, or what I was right on and you were wrong on.
Exactly.
What is one thing that you think would definitely pass this session?
I think the Office of Inspector General is going to be an issue that I think will pass. I think it should pass. And that's one thing where I think something more, most of the fraud action that we have seen has been executive order, governor's side. Legislators we have very close margins in the House, as mathematically as close to me, and the Senate is close. They're all up. There is going to need to be some votes and some legislation passed that legislators can put their arms around into their districts as they compete in this election cycle. So aside from being good politics, good campaign material, it's also good governance and good government. I think Office of Inspector General. Your take?
I'm going a little more boring. I think I could expect to see some more little fixes to some of the paid family leave acts that are now enacted, but maybe something that can give a little bit more certainty or answer some of the questions. I think that there might be a little bit more boring bills. I think that's a good take. I wouldn't be surprised if that gets passed. The Inspector General, I would love it to get passed, but I think it might be a little bit more boring of a session.
Got it. Go ahead.
What is one issue that you think will blow up or be a big messaging push from either side?
I'm going to change my answer. I'm going to say bonding. I think that you have adequately convinced me on bonding just by bringing it up and focusing on it. That's going to be the fight, I think.
Which side? The Democrats fighting for, Republicans against, or a mix?
I think a little bit of column A and a little bit on column B.
Okay.
I think that there's going to be a fight over bonding size and scope. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how the politics of politics, and particularly the governor's race, will factor in.
I think that's going to be a fight. I think there are a lot of people that want that. I think there's a lot of members who want money home for their districts, and a lot of projects that have a need. And I think there's a lot of hurting communities. So I think that there are going to be a lot of groups and organizations that are going to be advocating for that and making a lot of noise. And I wouldn't be surprised if there is a lot of push from in the press with that, because there's going to be some really good stories that come out from some of those advocate groups. I think one that I think could get a big messaging push is the argument around sanctuary cities and how that stands. I think this is something Republicans are looking to make a big stance on. how that goes, and kind of push back on the Democrats and saying, well, you guys said you were working with ICE anyways. Why don't we just, do away with this term, these sanctuary cities? I think that's one that I could see getting pretty fiery.
I think you've nailed it. I think that's that could really be a messaging point on both sides. I think that the opportunity for Republicans that they see to talk about an issue that they've largely believe is dealt with at the federal level, to get an opportunity to talk about it in those terms, I think will be something that they'll want to do.
And then my last prediction segment, what is one sleeper issue that no one is talking about that you think might get some attention or potentially even pass?
I think something with gaming. I'm going to throw out on
too.
gaming. I think sports gaming, something about that will get discussed. I think there'll be something like that is where I'm kind of the sleeper issue right now. That's what my take is. How about you?
Yep, mine was sports betting as well. I agree. I think it's something that's been kind of in the periphery. It's been there for the last couple of cycles. And I think there is, if folks want to get something done, I think there is a unique group of folks for and a unique group of folks against. I could see that being something that moves or at least gets a decent amount of attention.
Yep.
And that's all I got.
Great job, Becky. Fantastic episode.
It was a good conversation. I mean, we're back. It's crazy to think of where we were a year ago and that we were arguing about members showing up or not showing up. And I mean, wow, has it been a crazy, wild 13 months since the start of the last session.
It has been. A lot has changed, some for the good and some for the worse, but we are in a different environment, and we will be here. Becky, thank you. And I want to thank all of our listeners for joining us for this episode of The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before you go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the platform where you listen. You can also follow us on our website and across all social media platforms at BBBreakPod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will be back next week. Thank you so much for joining us.
Bye.